I wasn't looking for betrayal. I was looking for a sewing needle. The drawer stuck, as always, swollen with time and the weight of things that no longer worked: expired coupons, broken pens, the rubber band I used to wear on my wrist so I wouldn't forget the meatloaf. But today, beneath the usual clutter, my fingers brushed something sharper than a needle. A folder. Legal-sized. My husband's handwriting on the tab. Precise, plain. His name. Mine. I didn't panic. I just sat down, slowly, on the edge of the chair by the window. The folder opened easily, like it had been waiting. The dates on the papers inside were 7 years old. Long enough to feel distant, recent enough to sting. Every line of ink said the same quiet thing: I was no longer the destination. I was a detour. He'd left everything to someone else. A woman I'd never met. And the witnesses, my children. The same ones I had nursed through fevers, praised for coloring inside the lines, taught to say thank you. I closed the folder gently. My hand trembled, not with rage. Not yet. It was the tremble before a storm. The kind that wakes the birds before the sky splits open. That night, I did not speak. Not to Hank. Not to Eric or Melanie. Not even to myself. But I did not sleep either. By morning, I moved differently. Not rushed, not frantic, deliberate. Like someone setting a table for guests she knows won't arrive. I boiled water for coffee the old way, in the kettle Hank insisted we keep even after the electric one came. I didn't look at him as he read the paper. Didn't speak when he hummed through his teeth like he always did on Thursdays. I folded a dish towel twice before realizing I hadn't dried a single dish. The folder was still in the drawer. I hadn't moved it. But I had read it again. Not for clarity. For confirmation. 7 years ago. That would have been right around the time I stopped asking about the late nights at the hardware co-op. When I chalked up forgotten anniversaries to age. When Melanie started using that sing-song voice: "Mom, you worry too much." Eric's texts had shortened around then, too. Fewer photos of the grandkids. More updates I wasn't part of. It came back in pieces. The conversation when I asked about a joint account update and Hank changed the subject to dinner. The afternoon Melanie said, "Don't fuss with legal stuff, Mom. Dad's got it covered." The way Eric would always hand the phone to one of the kids before I got past "How are you?" It wasn't a conspiracy. It was a slow fade. A quiet rearranging of chairs at the table until I found myself sitting in the corner, no longer asked to pass the salt. Hank left for the lumberyard around 9. I waited until the car had pulled out of the driveway, until the gravel settled and the silence returned. Then I opened the drawer again. Took out the folder and placed it on the kitchen table. Not with reverence. With precision. As if lining up facts might bring me peace. The woman's name was Cheryl Dorrance. Not a name I recognized. Not a neighbor. Not from church. Not one of Hank's cousins who always came for the 4th of July and left potato salad I had to throw away. No address. No note. Just her name, clean and unadorned. The clause that startled me most was not that she was the sole beneficiary. It was the witness signatures. Eric L. Faulkner. Melanie G. Rhodes. Their names written carefully in blue ink. They had known. Or worse, they had helped. I stood there a long time. Long enough for the sun to move across the linoleum. The kitchen felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every clock tick, every breath. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since my mother's funeral. Tears felt too soft for this. Instead, I reached into the hall closet and took down the old brown coat, the one Hank said made me look like a librarian from a dusty novel. I wore it anyway. Not because it was warm. Because it was mine. I drove into town, parked 3 blocks from the law office, and walked. Each step felt like something I was reclaiming. The receptionist was young, with chipped nail polish and a too bright smile. "I have a walk-in," I said simply. "No appointment. But I'd like to speak to someone about a trust document." She hesitated. "Do you have a name?" "Carla, if she's in," I said. Carla Landry. Carla was one of the few attorneys in town who didn't look through me when I spoke. She had once helped me sort out a title mess when my cousin died without a will. I remembered her soft blouses and firm eyes. She came out 10 minutes later, her shoes clicking softly on the tile. "Miriam," she said, her voice warm but curious. "Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, holding up the folder. "But I need to find out." She took me into a small office, the kind with mismatched chairs and a jar of peppermints nobody touched. I handed her the folder without a word. She read silently, page by page. I watched her eyes narrow, then still. "Have you confronted him?" she asked quietly. "No." She nodded. "Do you want to?" "I want to understand what this means first." She sat back and sighed. "There's a clause," she said, tapping one of the final pages. "See here. If Cheryl declines the inheritance, everything reverts to the surviving spouse." My throat tightened. "So if I speak to her?" "She could refuse it." "Then everything returns to you." "She might not want to." "She might," Carla said, meeting my eyes. "Depending on what she thinks she's getting into." We both sat with that truth for a moment. Then I spoke the thing I hadn't dared say until now. "I don't want revenge," I whispered. "I just want back what's mine." Carla nodded once. "I can help you with that." The drive to Cheryl's took 42 minutes. I counted them in silence, hands tight around the wheel. The road wound through narrow rural streets, past weathered barns and empty schoolyards. Her address, pulled from a quiet inquiry Carla placed on my behalf, was tucked off a side road marked by a dented mailbox and an uneven gravel path. The house was smaller than I expected. Modest. Pale green paint peeling around the edges, but the flower beds were neat. Not grandiose. Not a mistress's lair. It looked ordinary. Like mine, once. I parked just outside the gate and sat for a moment. My coat was too warm now, and my hands smelled faintly of lavender from the hand lotion I'd applied before leaving the house. A stupid detail to remember, but sometimes the small things are all you can hold on to. I walked to the front door and knocked. One soft knock. Like the one I used to give when waking the children for school. It took a moment before I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. When Cheryl opened the door, she looked nothing like what I'd expected. She wasn't younger. She wasn't glamorous. She was my age, maybe older. Her eyes were tired in the way women's eyes get when they've been asked to be patient too many times. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but guarded. I took a breath. "My name is Miriam Faulkner. I believe we have something mutual to discuss." I watched her face shift. Surprise first. Then understanding. Then something else, a kind of weary resignation. She stepped aside. "Come in." Her living room smelled of lemon oil and old wool. A teacup sat half-drunk on the coffee table, next to a newspaper folded neatly in half. No photos. No signs of a shared life. Just quiet corners and a crocheted throw that looked handmade. She gestured for me to sit. I didn't. I remained standing, folder in hand. "I found this 2 days ago," I said. "In a drawer filled with broken pens and expired coupons. 7 years ago, Hank signed everything over to you." She didn't flinch. Just nodded. I know. You know. I didn't ask for it, she said quickly. He brought it to me. Said it was a formality. That it didn't mean anything legal yet. Just a gesture. A gesture, I repeated. He said you knew. I stared at her. I didn't. Her shoulders sank. I figured that out when I saw your name on the envelope. I told him not to drag me into anything that wasn't clean. So why didn't you say something? She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly sharp. Because I didn't think it was my place. Because women like us, we don't usually get the full story until it's too late. I didn't reply. I sat down slowly, the coat stiff across my shoulders. There's a clause, I said finally. If you decline the inheritance, it all reverts to me. She nodded. Carla Landry called me. Said you'd be coming. My heart gave a small start. You know Carla. Not well. But well enough. She picked up her tea and took a slow sip. Then set it down. I'll sign the declination. I blinked. Just like that. Just like that. She stood, walked to a small desk, and pulled out a manila envelope. I drafted the paperwork yesterday. I didn't want anything to do with it, not if it meant stealing a life I never built. My fingers hesitated as she handed me the envelope. Why? I asked. Why help me? She looked at me for a long moment. Then said simply. Because I was the other woman once before. I didn't know it then. But I know what it feels like to wake up one day and realize someone used you as a tool. A convenience. A pause. Men get to rewrite stories. We're expected to just smile and go along with the edits. I stood. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But something passed between us anyway, a flicker of recognition. A quiet nod across a battlefield neither of us chose. I left the house with the signed papers in my coat pocket. That night, I didn't speak to Hank. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't accuse or plead. I simply made a phone call, transferred the accounts back to my name, closed the joint credit line, and retitled the house deed. And then I went into the study and created a trust for my granddaughter. 2 names. Mine and hers. When I told Eric and Melanie, they looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You're cutting us off? Eric asked. I looked at them. Really looked. I'm releasing you, I said quietly. You are no longer in debt to me. But you are no longer my heirs either. Melanie's mouth opened, then shut again. Eric looked down at his shoes. I kept things from you once, I said. But you kept bigger things from me. Silence. No tears. Just facts. They tried to fight me. I expected as much. The week after I reclaimed the accounts, Melanie sent me a long letter typed in clinical language, full of gentle manipulations. We're concerned about your emotional well-being, decisions made in haste, potential misunderstanding regarding the documents. It was dressed up in sympathy, but the undertone was plain. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Eric called the next day. His voice was careful, like he was tiptoeing across ice. Mom, I know you're upset, he began. But we all signed that document years ago because Dad said it was what you both agreed to. He told you I knew. I asked, my voice as even as I could manage. Yes. He said it was just a technicality. That you didn't want to be bothered with it. Did you ever ask me? He paused. Well, no. I assumed. That was your mistake. There was a silence I didn't break. Eric cleared his throat. Look, we can fix this. You don't have to do anything drastic. Let's sit down. As a family. You already had your seat at the table, I said softly. And you used it to sign me away. He sighed. Mom, don't do this. You're better than this. No, Eric, I said, feeling something cold and quiet settle in my chest. I'm just not smaller than this anymore. 2 days later, a legal envelope arrived. They'd filed a petition. A claim of undue influence. Alleged that I had coerced Cheryl. That I was making decisions in a state of emotional distress, and the trust one created for my granddaughter should be invalidated. They were trying to unmake me. I brought the letter to Carla. She scanned it with narrowed eyes. They're grasping, she said. But we'll answer it. And we'll fight it. I don't want to fight for money, I whispered. I want to fight for the truth. For my place. And so we did. The hearing was set 3 weeks later. The courtroom was small, just a local room with old wood and stiff chairs. I wore my mother's brooch. Not for luck. For strength. Eric and Melanie sat at one table, flanked by a lawyer with a fresh degree and an expensive tie. Hank was not there. I had told him he didn't need to be. Or maybe he understood he was no longer allowed. My table was quieter. Carla beside me. Calm, methodical. Her presence like a hand on my shoulder. The judge was a woman in her 70s. Gray hair pulled back into a bun so tight it softened nothing. Her eyes, when they lifted from the documents, were hard as polished stone. Mrs. Faulkner, she said, do you understand what's being contested here? I do. And are you prepared to speak? I stood. My knees felt steady, though my hands trembled slightly where they rested on the table. I'm not here for compensation, I said. I'm not even here for justice, though some would call it that. I paused. Looked directly at my children. Their eyes flicked toward the floor. I'm here because for 38 years, I held this family together. I gave up more than I can name, not because I was asked to, but because I believed in what we were building. In who we were. I swallowed. I did not disappear in a day. I was erased in inches. Slowly. Painlessly, perhaps, to those doing the erasing. But not to me. I turned to the judge. All I want is the right to exist. Not as a relic. Not as a burden. But as a person whose life still holds value. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock tick. The judge looked over her glasses at Eric and Melanie. You claim your mother is acting irrationally, she said. I see no evidence of that. What I see is a woman who has been methodically shut out of her family's legacy and is now reclaiming her own story. Her gavel struck once. Petition denied. All transfers and trusts will remain as filed. My hand stayed still, even as Carla leaned in and whispered, we won. But something deeper than victory moved through me. It was the sound of my own name being spoken with dignity. Outside the courtroom, Eric and Melanie didn't look at me. Didn't speak. They walked ahead, their steps too fast to be casual. I didn't follow. I didn't go back to the house. After the ruling, I packed only what I needed. A suitcase of modest clothes, my photo album, 3 of my favorite books, and the brooch. I left behind the china, the furniture, the linen napkins embroidered with my initials. Let them have the objects. I had already reclaimed the one thing they couldn't touch, my place. I found a small apartment above a cafe on Maple Street. It had a narrow balcony and creaky floors. The bedroom faced east, and in the mornings the light came through in soft slants, warming the old pine wood dresser I found secondhand. It was not much. But it was mine. The cafe owners, a quiet couple named Jeanette and Eli, welcomed me like an old friend. Jeanette gave me a small key to the side door, so I wouldn't have to climb the outside stairs when it rained. Eli made me coffee most mornings and added a splash of cream without asking, the way I liked it. We didn't talk much, but I began to feel something I hadn't in years seen. I didn't tell many people where I had gone. I left a simple note in the mailbox at home. Please forward mail to this address. No visitors, no apologies. I am not hiding. I am living. In the first few weeks, I didn't do much. I sat with myself. Not in mourning, exactly. But in recognition. I took long walks to nowhere in particular. I reread old letters I had almost forgotten existed. I pulled out a notebook and began writing, not memories exactly, but moments. Sentences that came in flashes. I was. I am. I will be. It became a kind of ritual. Each night before bed, I wrote one truth I had forgotten. A memory that belonged to me alone. The lavender candle I never got to light in Hawaii. The blue sweater I wore when Eric was born. The sound of Hank's breath the night he came home with news of his mother's passing. These small things, I wrote them all. Not to make anyone else understand. But so I would not forget. A month later, I received a letter. Not from Hank. From Cheryl. It was handwritten. Careful. Miriam. I thought you might want to know. Hank came by. He looked smaller than I remembered. He said nothing about the documents, just that he hadn't expected you to act so decisively. I told him the truth. That you were owed more than anyone had ever admitted. He didn't argue. Sincerely. Cheryl. I folded the letter and placed it inside the notebook. Later that week, I saw my granddaughter. Not by accident. I had invited her. I didn't ask Melanie's permission. I wrote a note on paper and mailed it to her school. Dear Grace. If you would like to share a cup of tea and hear a story or two, I am here. Love, Grandma Miriam. She came. She wore her school cardigan and her hair in a braid I used to do for her. She didn't ask about the courtroom or the money. She just looked around the small apartment and said, "It smells like honey in here." I brewed her tea. We sat quietly. No explanations. Just warmth. I showed her the photo of me and Hank when we were her age. She stared at it for a long time and said, "You looked happy." I told her. We didn't speak of what came after. Before she left, she hugged me. Not politely. Not out of duty. But like she remembered. After she was gone, I stood on the balcony and watched the people below. I had no plans. No grand statements to make. But the wind felt different. Lighter. One morning, I went to the train station. I bought a ticket to Santa Fe. One way. For no reason other than I could. I didn't tell anyone. At the platform, I held my coat tight around me. That old brown one Hank hated. I liked the way it smelled, like dust and rain and memory. I boarded the train. The seat was warm. The view was unfamiliar. I smiled, not out of revenge. Not out of defiance. But out of something quieter. Something that felt, at last, like return. The train slowed just outside Santa Fe, the wheels hissing against the rail like a long exhale. I pressed my fingers to the window. Red earth. Wide sky. Light so sharp it made even dust seem holy. I stepped off with nothing but my suitcase and the notebook, its pages soft now from handling. The air smelled like juniper and distance. I didn't know where I was going. That was the point. At a small and near canyon road, I took a room with a view of a cracked adobe wall and a single blooming cactus. I hung my coat on the peg by the door and opened all the windows. The desert air swept in like forgiveness. Each morning, I walked. No destinations. Just movement. I watched artists set up their easels before sunrise. I listened to church bells echo down narrow lanes. I bought peaches from a roadside stall and let the juice run down my wrist without shame. One afternoon, I wandered into a small community library, one of those old sunlit spaces where silence feels warm, not heavy. On impulse, I asked the woman at the desk if they took volunteers. She blinked. "You mean, you'd want to help us?" I smiled. "That's all I've ever done." By the next week, I was shelving books and reading aloud to children whose laughter rang like music I'd forgotten. But it wasn't until the day I found Grace's letter in my mailbox that I cried. Handwritten. Just like mine had been. "Dear Grandma. I wore the cardigan you made me last week, and my teacher asked who taught me to braid my hair. I said, my grandmother. She knows how to fix things. I want to come visit. I want to learn how to be like you. Love. Grace." I held the letter against my heart. Not because it changed everything, but because it reminded me of what had never changed. My story had not been erased. It had taken a long road, and it had been through sorrow, but here it was, in the hands of a girl who remembered. Who wanted to know. Who wanted to carry it forward. I looked out the window at the sun dropping behind the hills. The light turned everything gold. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something had ended. I felt like something had begun.